The year is 1982. We find ourselves in the Ivory Coast, at the start of the final leg of a crucial round in the rally season. After hours and hours of tough, relentless driving, the two title contenders would start this decisive section in a dead heat, as incredibly, they have posted the exact same time. And to the absolute shock of many people watching, one of them is a woman. And not only is she trying to fight off her rival, but she's also fighting to stifle her utter despair due to receiving a horrific piece of news prior to starting the race. Will she be able to triumph? This is the story of a young girl from France who came and showed the men how it's done. This is the incredible story of Michèle Mouton, a person that many would consider as the greatest female driver in history.
Hi guys, Darup here. Before we start, I'd like to quickly say that this is a very special video for the incredible achievement of this channel reaching 100k subscribers. Thank you very much. Michèle Mouton is one of my favorite rally drivers of all time, and her story is truly incredible, as she was definitely vital in helping me foster my addiction to the sport. And so I decided to dedicate my 100k subscriber special to her and her amazing career. To make sure the quality of the video is as good as it can be, the narrator and language revisor is again our friend Jacko. Don't forget to visit his channel. But without further ado, grab some popcorn as we head to the beautiful landscapes of southern France.
The story begins way back in the early 1960s. The young Michèle, born in 1951 in Grasse in the French mountains, would find her first taste of driving at the age of 14, as she would regularly motor about in her father's Citroën 2CV. However, the interest in racing would not start here. In 1972, Mouton met Jean Taibbi, and the two quickly became friends. While attending a rock and roll concert, Taibbi began talking about rallying to her, and he invited her to become his co-driver at the 1973 Monte Carlo Rally, the opening round of the first ever World Rally Championship. He would also have her on board for some local rallies in France. While the results were not at all anything to write home about in this initial experience with Taibbi, Mouton had begun to understand and, more importantly, enjoy the sport of rallying. Michèle's father was actually very enthusiastic about his daughter's growing interest in rallying, as he himself longed to become a racer. However, he was not a fan of Taibbi, who he considered to be too cocky. So he proposed a different deal to his daughter. "Listen, I know you like driving and I prefer to see you doing that than navigating. I'm going to buy you a car and provide funding for you to do 1 year with proper equipment, and we'll see how you get on. If you do well, you can continue. If not, you must give it up." Pierre Mouton was not a rich man, but he kept his word. Michèle was presented with a brand new Alpine A110 prepared for Group 3, which was rather undeniably one of the greatest rally cars of the time. Michèle had the tools, the funding and the car to do well. Now it was up to her. And either way, one thing was for sure, Michèle loved the challenge. Now, if I were to ask you the question of what is the best way to show your talents to your father, there's probably a range of answers you may think of, but winning in your class at a rally championship is surely one of the best. At the end of 1974, Mouton was crowned the French ladies champion, which isn't a bad start at all. With these achievements, the bet was won, her father was content and the first sponsors began to rear their heads, and so Michèle's racing career was to go ahead. In 1975, Mouton would defend her French title, even adding to it with the European ladies crown. For Michèle, however, one thing had become very clear. She wasn't going to find much more competition by racing solely against the women. She had her eyes on bigger fish, the men. Her philosophy explains her position rather well. When you're in the car, nobody can say if it's a man or a woman driving. And so, in that year's WRC round in France, she surprised everyone in the masculine world with a very impressive 7th overall and first in class, more or less 20 minutes ahead of her closest adversary, Bernard Piccone. In fact, her success here was such an upset that rumours began to spread of a quote-unquote special engine that was mounted in her car. However, after passing scrupulous inspection by the WRC officials, her opponents had come to terms with the fact that there was nothing unfairly special or advanced about her car at all. Michèle was simply a badass, plain and simple. And it wasn't just rallying that Mouton was testing the waters on. In the same year, she also tried her hand at circuit racing, debuting at the 24 Hours of Le Mans as part of a completely female team. The result? Yet another class victory for the French driver, piloting the 2-litre Moynet LM75 prototype. About her track racing experience, Michelle remembers, "It started to rain and I started to pass everybody. I was running on slicks. In the pits they were saying, 'Michelle, you must stop,' but I didn't want to because I was passing everyone." However, she seemed to get much more enjoyment out of the ever-changing routes and surfaces found on rally stages, and so she wouldn't really look to compete in any more circuit races after this. 1976 would see the streak of good results continue, with an 11th at the Monte Carlo Rally. However, it was more of a transitionary year for Mouton. 1977 though would be a great season for her. French company Elf would sponsor Mouton and she would tackle the European Rally Championship in the main class, piloting a Porsche 911 Carrera RS. It was in this championship that Mouton would see her first overall win at the 1977 Rally de España, and with some other good results backing this up, she would place second overall in the championship standings, behind veteran driver Bernard Darniche, but ahead of rising star Ari Vatanen. Michelle would then move over to Fiat for 3 seasons. Initially, she would describe the new 131 Abarth as terrible to drive due to an absence of power steering and the engine being at the front, but she would later admit that the Fiat was very important for her to understand how to drive faster. Mouton would end up posting some positive results in the new machine. She took first at the 1978 Tour de France Automobile, second place in the French Championship, and an impressive 4th in the FIA Cup for drivers. It was all too clear to her competitors that Mouton really could drive. It would be at the end of this stint of excellent results that her career would see the introduction of the next stage. The boss of the Audi Works team offered her a place for 7 events in the following season in their new Quattro, alongside Hannu Mikkola. Audi's decision to nominate her instead of established male rivals attracted a great deal of publicity for the Ingolstadt team. The German manufacturer was the first to bet on the superiority of 4-wheel drive technology being applied to road cars. Of course, the story goes that most other teams doubted it would work at all, but as you all probably know, Audi proved them wrong. Very wrong. From here on out, the landscape of rallying was completely changed. The Quattro basically became the frontrunner for almost everything on the rallying calendar. Mouton would recollect her first test with the Quattro to motorsportmagazine.com. The new technology was obviously interesting and revolutionary, but I wasn't as bothered about that as I was about the possibility of challenging for the WRC title. I remember how impressive the car felt during some early testing in the snow, when on standard rubber the Audi felt the same as other cars did on studded tyres. In 1981, Audi contested more or less half of the events and was essentially a learning year, as both the car and the entire team behind it were brand new. In any case, the team's first win arrived very quickly at the second round, Sweden, thanks to Hannu Mikkola. As for Michelle, well, the season did not start brilliantly. Sand in the fuel tank forced the Queen of Speed to stop even before beginning the first round, Monte Carlo, immediately setting her on the back foot. At Mouton's next round, Portugal, things did go a little better. She would begin her long partnership with Italian co-driver Fabrizio Pons, and she claimed victory on 7 stages, but after suffering some electrical problems, would settle for 4th. However, in the following rounds, while the French driver was showcasing a very good pace, a lack of both personal experience and reliability in her car would mean that she would ultimately earn no more points. But then came the day when Mouton would truly carve her place into motorsporting history, and it wasn't long after. The day is the 10th of October 1981, the last day of Rally San Remo. Despite beginning the rally in a rather disappointing 13th place, the multi-surface event quickly changed from tarmac to gravel, and very quickly she started to recover. With Mikkola already lingering behind with technical problems, and with her other teammate Shinoto crashing, Mouton had become the last hope for Audi, and the news got even better for her. Walter Röhrl, who was enjoying a comfortable lead in his Porsche, would end up breaking his gearbox, and so the French driver was able to swoop in and take the opportunity for the lead. However, in rallying you really can't count your chickens until the eggs have hatched. Michelle arrived at the next service point among clouds of smoke and sparks, with a wheel on full lock. The mechanics took more time to repair the damage than she had available, and Michelle was slowly losing all the time that she'd been able to build up. Her advantage had been reduced to as little as 30 seconds. Ari Vatanen, who was snapping at her heels in second, observed, "The day I will be beaten by a woman, I will stop racing." It was clear that the Finn was ready to give everything to avoid being beaten by Michelle, and even worse, the surface had returned to the tarmac, not a place where the Quattro excelled.
We have not a proper asphalt, and they have a proper asphalt.
With the pressure mounting, Michelle found that she could not sleep at all that evening upon returning to the hotel. Upon getting back into the car the next day, she turned to look at her co-driver and said, "Okay, we forget everything and we're back at the first stage of the rally again, because one of us will crash." Just as she predicted, not long after arrived the news that Vatanen had hit a rock and was out of the race. And now really nothing could stop the French girl, and Mouton managed to score her breakthrough WRC victory in San Remo, beating out the very best of 80s rally drivers. This was enough proof that she really had what it took to fight for the title, and a full season seat was confirmed by Audi for 1982. Things had seemed to fall into place for Michelle. Audi had created a car that could easily win on gravel, dirt and snow. The main problem was that pesky little thing called unreliability. But with the prospect of efficient German engineering fixing this problem in time for the next season, her opponents were certainly in for some tough competition. While many people of the time doubted and even flat out disliked Mouton and her talents, her teammate Hannu Mikkola would end up being one of her biggest supporters. The Flying Finn spent many hours with Michelle during the season, helping her to better understand the car and giving her lots of suggestions to push herself to new heights. Usually a teammate would provide the single biggest rivalry to a driver in any given rally, but the atmosphere at the Audi team was rather different, with Mouton and Mikkola becoming true friends, working together for both the team and each other's benefits. As for Ari Vatanen and his promise, well, obviously he did not retire, and would end up apologising to Michelle. "Her speed took me and everybody else by surprise. It put our masculine pride to the test." And so came the start of the 1982 season, a year that was marked by overwhelming German dominance. Audi had the fastest car on pretty much every stage, and Opel too had put forward a very reliable contender, bolstered by German driver Walter Röhrl. Could Michelle possibly have a chance of taking the world crown among such stiff competition? Well, like the running in the year before, the opening round was not a good start for Michelle. Not far into the rally, her Quattro would lose grip around a fast right-hander, the likely perpetrator being black ice. Whatever it was, the Audi would come to rest against the wall of a house. Her co-driver, Pons, was unharmed, but Michelle was forced to wear a cast on her left leg until the next round. Plus, Walter Röhrl, who will be the main opponent for the Audi team, claimed victory over Hannu Mikkola. Round 2 was once again in the ever beautiful foothills of Sweden, which this year was almost foreseeing complete snow cover, the perfect terrain for the four-wheel drive Audi to let rip. And the Bavarian team certainly took advantage, with 3 of their cars in the top 3 places early on, being Mikkola, Swedish driver Stig Blomqvist, and Michelle taking 3rd. Not a bad start for someone who had just recovered from injury. But as quickly as it started to turn round, disaster yet again struck the team. 5 special stages before the rally's end, Mikkola slid into a snowbank, and his Quattro would end up being stuck, blocking half the street. While spectators were furiously attempting to put the Finnish Quattro back on the road, Blomqvist hurtled through, barely missing the stuck Audi. However, a collision was only postponed, as Mouton quickly arrived on the scene, but unlike Blomqvist, would not be able to avoid Mikkola. No one was hurt thankfully, but Mouton would lose several minutes and her podium position. Audi themselves were not quite as displeased, with Blomqvist getting them their first victory of the year. Röhrl would settle for 3rd, and Michelle would limp to the finish in 5th. The 3rd round brought the competition to Portugal, a mixed surface event, the first leg to be on tarmac with the rest on dirt. Mouton had already shown good pace here in 1981, so this would be her opportunity to fight her way back into a top position after a poor season start. By the end of the first leg she was in 4th behind Mikkola and the two Opel Asconas of Henri Toivonen and Walter Röhrl. Dissatisfied, the French driver really put the pedal to the metal when the race reached the gravel, and despite the fog, she was unstoppable. Mikkola would roll his Audi on the first special stage of the second leg, and both the Opel drivers would fall away from the lead one after the other. And Michelle confidently earned her second ever WRC victory, a whole 13 minutes ahead of Per Eklund's Toyota Celica, and a whopping 27 minutes ahead of the third place Audi of Franz Wittmann. With Röhrl breaking his steering and ultimately crashing his Opel, Michelle was able to climb her way back up onto the leaderboard. She was now second in the driver's standings, just 4 points behind her German rival. For the Safari Rally, an African marathon where reliability is the key to winning, Audi decided on a no-show. The new car was still considered too fragile and unreliable for the demanding event. With Opel's Röhrl claiming second, his advantage over Michelle would increase. This was not helped by the fact that round 5 was the all-tarmac Tour de Corsa, and it was fair to say that this round was an absolute disaster for the Audi squad. A mechanic crashed Mikkola's car before the start of the event, and so the Finnish driver had to start the event in a practice car, and he broke the gearbox after only 7 kilometers. The event continued along this trajectory. Mouton, the lead Audi, was only able to scrape herself 7th place, as the Quattro was simply too heavy and bulky for the narrow Corsican streets. And so, both Audi and Mouton knew that round 6, the Acropolis Rally in Greece, was going to be crucial to maintain competitiveness in the hunt for the title. However, the Acropolis is considered by many to be the European Safari. No less than 1,000 kilometers of stages across numerous different terrains, most intimidating of all being the dusty, rocky mountain roads that claimed its fair share of racers each year. But this did not deter the French driver. As early as halfway through the first leg, Michelle had already been able to settle herself into a very advantaged position. Plus, with rivals having problems and many being forced to retire, Mouton would practically coast along in first place unchallenged, and she kept up this streak, winning almost half of the special stages, and ultimately finishing with yet another 13-minute advantage, this time over her German rival, Röhrl, who rolled across in second. Mouton had yet again saved the day for Audi. Of the 4 Quattros on the starting line, hers was the only one to see the finish. Even better, Michelle had now been promoted to the position of Audi's first driver. In fact, Mikkola, plagued by a range of consistent problems, was completely out of contention for the title. It had now become essentially a two-way battle. Röhrl was currently leading the pack, 20 points ahead of Mouton. Walter clearly felt the pressure, the media continuously writing that he could be the first man to be defeated by a woman. He replied caustically, stating that, "You could put a monkey in the Audi and it would win." While it's hard to deny the superiority of the Quattro in most circumstances, Mouton was beating, among others, her Audi teammate, Hannu Mikkola, in the same machinery, and he was by no means a slacker himself, as he would of course take the WRC crown in 1983. Naturally, this declaration caused a significant uproar, and Michelle was branded by the media as La Femme qui dérange, which translates to the cold-as-hell nickname of the woman that upsets. Audi then made its first ever trip to the Rally of New Zealand, which in retrospect was a complete waste of money and time, as the entire team scored a combined total of 0 points. Mouton herself seemed to be near her 3rd victory of the season, or at least a podium position, but her engine blew after an oil pipe broke while she was leading the event. Röhrl managed to wrangle 3rd, but Michelle was by no means out of contention for the title. The 8th round of the season, on the muddy and marshy dirt tracks of Brazil, was likely the most engaging round of the head-to-head between Mouton and Röhrl yet. The two contenders would finish 1st and 2nd on all 29 special stages with the exception of 3. But the two strategies differed heavily. Röhrl went for a pure maximum attack, trying to keep pace with the Quattro in his rear-wheel drive Opel. Michelle, by contrast, simply opted to keep up a good pace and avoid putting too much pressure on her fragile car, The four-wheel drive gave her a huge advantage here. Heavy rain welcomed the drivers on the first leg. The result? Only 8 out of 55 cars started the much sunnier second leg, with the two title contenders switching positions numerous times. Entering the second leg, the Opel driver was leading and was able to parry every furious attack by Michelle, but by the fourth leg the Femke d'Orange had become much more consistent. Röhrl was forced to hand the lead back over, but without any surrender, the battle wasn't over yet. The French driver did not let up, continuing to trade fastest times with the German. However, when Röhrl went off the road and broke his steering, he fell a considerable amount away from the lead. The winning margin, which was really no measure of the closely contested battle, was a whopping 35 minutes. Michelle's third win was safely secured. In the next two rounds of Finland and San Remo, the point situation did not change very much. The only podium either of the two frontrunners were able to manage was a third for Röhrl at San Remo by the skin of his teeth. By contrast, these two rounds were a significant help to Audi's efforts, with them taking first and second at both. The trip to round 11, the Ivory Coast, was therefore going to be a very crucial round for the driver's title. Because this championship was taking place in 1982, it was operating under an old rule set that considers only the 7 best results. If Mouton were to win here, she would only need a third place in the last round at Great Britain to achieve her incredible feat. Röhrl's results were simply not that important anymore. The Ivory Coast round was long, rough and demanding. It was an African marathon, similar to the more well-known Safari Rally, but by no means any less intimidating, notably having a lot of its route down in the jungle. Audi, who had initially not planned to enter the event as they had at the Safari Rally, had a change of heart last minute and prepared everything to support their front-running driver as best they could. Stig Blomqvist was called up to drive a Quattro as a course opening car, while Mikkola was in a Quattro that was basically an unofficial chase car, which actually had Roland Gumpert as the co-driver. He may not have been great with the pace notes, but very useful as a mechanic. Everything had been put in place for this massive challenge, but just 2 hours before the start of the event, Michelle received a phone call which would change the trajectory of her career forever. Her number one fan, the person who pushed her to become so great, her father, had passed away. It was an unexpected blow. Michelle was naturally devastated by the news, and she was ready to drop the competition entirely and return to France. The rally was merely in the background now, and both Fabrizia and Gumpert supported her decision. It was only when Mouton's mother reminded her that her father would have wanted her to race that she decided to stay. Perhaps marking this win for her father would be a fitting goodbye. Mouton didn't tell the rest of the team what had happened because she did not feel strong enough. Michelle would later recollect that at points during the rally she was in tears. Yet, despite everything, the grieving driver managed to build a 25-minute lead early on, later stretching it to a seriously impressive near 90 minutes. At this point, as a precaution, the team decided to change the gearbox. However, the operation did not go well. The clutch was now not working, and so they had to replace everything again. In total, this gearbox fiasco cost an hour and a half, which meant almost 1 hour of penalisation. Her lead over second place, Röhrl, shrank to a mere 25 minutes, and there was still the fourth and final leg to contest with. And the problems didn't end there, as at the start of the final leg, Mouton's Quattro simply did not want to start, and Michelle lost another 25 minutes. Like it was part of a movie script, the two title contenders were now entering the final day with identical times. And then came the 46th time stretch, which contained a very infamous turn after a long straight. Both Eklund and Röhrl went off the road here, though came away with very little damage. Mouton, however, was not so lucky. After coming off the road at the same place, the Quattro would roll numerous times, damaging pretty much everything including the windscreen. However, it could still move, even if not in great condition. Mouton would now have to push even harder to increase the distance between her and Röhrl, but with it now being foggy and with a complete lack of pace notes, which had flown out of the car during the crash, another inevitable accident would follow. With the Quattro even more damaged than before, former world champion Bjorn Waldegard, who was driving for Toyota, arrived on the scene. He and his co-driver would try and help get the Audi back on the road, refusing to restart without seeing the Quattro moving again. Bruno Sebi, a Renault driver, would also arrive to help out. Michelle and Fabrizio were very moved by this generosity, but it was clear that the car had experienced a complete knockout, and Mouton was forced to throw in the towel. Unfortunately for her, this would now make it impossible to overtake the German, and Walter Röhrl would claim the title of the 1982 World Rally Champion. Decades later, Röhrl told Dirtfish, "Really, it was nothing to be world champion, but it would be a very special thing for the future to have had a woman be the world champion." Even after suffering defeat, Michelle did not dwell on losing the title, considering the terrible news that she had received before the rally. In Claude Garnier's opinion, her boyfriend at the time, the loss of her father was an important contribution to the end of Mouton's driving career. She would slowly change and started to think about relationships and having a family. Some consolation would come though. After claiming second at the final round in Great Britain behind her teammate Mikola, she ended the season in second place. Audi, on the other hand, was proclaimed the Constructors' Champion of 1982, the first German brand to achieve this. In a previous video on this channel, we covered the 1983 season of the World Rally Championship, a titanic battle between the reigning champions, Audi, and returning rally legend Lancia. While it was a true story of David versus Goliath, we won't dwell on it here, link to it is in the description. By contrast, 1983, for Mouton at least, was not a successful follow-up to her efforts in 1982. The main rival of Mouton this year was luck. Her lower placement was largely down to two mistakes that she made in both Monte Carlo and Greece, and then in almost every other rally she was slowed down by various technical issues that were out of her control. Emblematic of this theme was her DNF in New Zealand, due to a broken engine that just had to go while she was in first, and very close to the finish. By the end of the season, with 3 podiums, she finished 5th in the drivers' standings. For 1984, Audi added their once main rival, Walter Röhrl, to their already formidable lineup, and they had a true hand of aces, Mikola, Blomqvist, Röhrl and of course Mouton, but not all rallies were on the programme for the last 2. Michelle, in particular, only signed a 5-event contract, and in this season she would finish on the podium for the last time in her career, with a 2nd place in the Swedish round. But by no means did this mean that Mouton's bank of achievements had come to the end of the road yet. For 1985 she wanted to cut back on her level of commitments to the sport, and so signed on to a contract for testing and development duties. This led to her driving both the Sport Quattro S1 and the legendary S1E2 in the British Rally Championship. This campaign, however, was plagued by reliability issues from the start, with just one paltry event finish. Her only drive in the WRC that year at the Ivory Coast continued this streak of bad luck. The team was accused of car swapping, and team principal Roland Gumpert had no choice but to retire her car while she was in 4th position. However, 1985 wasn't all storm clouds for her. Audi needed Mouton's help to win Pikes Peak, an infamous international hill climb in the Rocky Mountain range of the USA. They saw a win at this event to be crucial for the visibility of the German brand in North America. In the previous year, the duo of Mouton and Pons finished 2nd, though they did take victory in their class, not to mention that this was their first participation in the event, not bad at all. But in 1985, Audi and Mouton wanted overall victory. However, yet again for the poor driver, another problem would plague her efforts. This time it was a controversial penalisation before the start of the event. They accused me of having exceeded the speed limit by 5 miles per hour when practice started. I was fined and I told I wouldn't be allowed to sit in the car at the start, that I would have to jump in and buckle up before I could leave the line. I pointed out that it would be crazy to do that, and possibly unsafe if I didn't do up my belts properly, so they backed off and agreed to let me be in the car, but Audi's mechanics had to push me to the line, and I wasn't allowed to select a gear until the clock had started. To be honest, all they succeeded in doing was increasing my motivation.
Michelle Mouton came to the start line, pushed by the entire Audi team.
And despite the slippery conditions caused by a hailstorm, not only did she win the hill climb, but she also destroyed the previous record by an astounding 13 seconds. The record had been held by the Unser family for 3 generations, each son beating the record of his father, and when it was broken, Bobby Unser, the former record holder, was vocally upset. Mouton responded with, "If you have the balls, you can try and race me back down as well." That shut him up. Michelle was also the first non-American driver to have won the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. Furthermore, she remains the only female to date to have earned this victory. 1986 then arrived with some very surprising news. Mouton had accepted the Court of Peugeot, piloting their 205 T16, breaking her successful years-long collaboration with Audi. This year's program saw her compete in her 2 WRC home events, Monte Carlo and Corsica, plus the German Rally Championship. The WRC campaign started badly, with a retirement due to technical problems, and she would see an even worse conclusion at the Tour de Corse, with the tragedy of Henri Toivonen's and Sergio Cresto's death in their Lancia Delta S4. Michelle was already out of the race when the news arrived, this time due to a gearbox problem, while she was holding a respectable 3rd position. And as you all likely know, the FIA would respond to this accident by banning all Group B machinery for good. Mouton, who was 35 years old at the time, decided that this transitionary period in rally sport to be the perfect moment to retire from her driving career and start a family, but not before she completed the German Rally Championship. Here, Michelle quickly earned another nickname, Der Schwarze Vulkan, which translates to the even colder moniker of the Black Volcano, a name given to her by the press due to her furious temperament and her long black hair. And her competition, a majority of German drivers, clearly had no chance of quelling the eruption. Mouton won 6 of the 8 events, the other 2 being retirements, total domination. And with the Volcano winning the German title in 1986, it was a very nice way of rounding out her mainstream career. Mouton would later become a mother in 1987, curiously around the same time as her historical co-driver Fabrizia Pons. But nonetheless, Mouton would remain actively engaged with the sport that forged her iconic identity. 1 year later, she co-founded the Race of Champions in memory of her friend Henri Toivonen. The Race of Champions continues to this day as a multidiscipline contest between some of the world's very best drivers. If you've never watched it, it's a highly recommended experience. She would also enter some rally raid events around this time, but only as part of the Peugeot support team. Other than that, she would occasionally participate in other notable competitions, the 2 most notable being the winning of the Female Cup in the 1995 Trophy Andros, and she would even take 2nd behind former teammate Stig Blomqvist in the 2000 London to Sydney Marathon behind the wheel of a Porsche 911. Today, Mouton maintains a strong showing in the sport, acting as the FIA manager for the World Rally Championship since 2011, overseeing the world that she once took by storm, a feat that no woman has managed to repeat since. It would truly be amazing to see a woman again at the top of the podium, and perhaps with the help of other new introductions like the W Series, this might not be a concept that's too far in the future. And surely our French Queen of Speed would be a mighty source of inspiration for this movement of women in motorsport. Michelle Mouton remains to this day the most successful female driver of all time, outscoring her male colleagues and rivals multiple times over, and she's a female icon that really does deserve so much more recognition in the world of sports. Mouton didn't just show that women do actually belong in sporting realms largely dominated by the men, she screamed it as loudly as possible, over the doubters, over all the distractions, and even over the roar of her Audi Quattro.